I'd like to call the January 10th, 2006 study session to order. Madam Clerk.
The record will reflect that council members Heffernan and Nichols are absent.
Okay. Do we have clarifications of items on the consent calendar? Councilmember Daigle?
None necessary, thank you.
Councilmember Ridgway?
Hang on, I wrote myself a note.
Are you going to be able to interpret it?
That's a good question. No, I'll wait until tonight's meeting. Let me see. I got another note. Nope. Thank you.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Do you have any strings tied to your fingers, or no?
Rubber bands.
Rubber bands? No, nothing right now. Thank you.
I have nothing.
And Councilmember Heffernan, do you have anything that you wish to clarify on this consent calendar?
No, thank you.
And I have none, so that we will continue. The next item on our agenda are harbor issues, charter boats, commercial harbor activities, permits, and more. Mr. Kiff, are you presenting that today?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. You could kill the lights for me, Councilmember Heffernan. I appreciate that. Thank you. Mr. Mayor and council members, this item comes to you in part because of a request made by Councilmember Heffernan in December to take a look at charter operations, and it just so happened that the Harbor Commission and the Harbor Resources staff and the Revenue staff had been looking at this issue as well. So we thought it was a good time to bring before you a number of harbor issues, mostly focusing on charters, but there's some other ones in there as well. So with me today was Glenn Everode, the Revenue Manager, Tom Rossmiller, the Harbor Resources Manager, and Chris Miller, the Harbor Resources Supervisor. And we're going to go through hopefully a relatively brief PowerPoint with you, and we'll be popping up and down to present different slides. I'm going to quickly go over what we're going to cover. First, charter boats, including some good things about the charter industry, just so folks are aware of that. And then we're going to talk about how charters are permitted, and they're permitted in two different ways. We're going to go over revenue from charter operations, charter issues like noise, size, and a recent accident involving the Endeavor, and then some of the Harbor Commission's concepts, and I think we might see Commissioner, there he is, Commissioner Rodheim is with us today. And I just wanted to say the Harbor Commission has spent an awful lot of time on these issues along with Harbor Resources, and I think you'd be impressed with the dedication they put into these. Finally, we're going to get towards the end with harbor fee issues and looking at the harbor fees from three different perspectives. And then time for questions and follow-up action items. But please feel free to interrupt us throughout the presentation if you have a specific question about something on the slide. So moving right along, the economic value of the charter industry. This is a slide that was presented to us by the charter industry, just to remind you and the folks at home that this is what they believe they provide to us, including hotel and TOT revenue from guests who join the yacht, who participate in the yachts, and our passengers, use of local marine services and non-marine services that involve those charters, restaurant and bar operations, retail purchases, office and slip rental, employment for some of our residents and certainly residents throughout the region. And they do offer some support for nonprofit, chamber, and other charities through donations of some of their services. And then they do partner with the CVB, the Conference and Visitors Bureau, in promoting the overall area to meeting planners as a destination for folks to come and either enjoy a Christmas time cruise or a cruise throughout the year.
Can I make a comment to this slide?
Please do.
Obviously, that slide is an exception to the people who come here on charter buses, get on the boat, and leave on the bus afterwards. So none of this plays to the charter buses that bring in people.
Okay.
Thank you.
I'm going to switch over now to Tom Rossmiller, who's going to talk about the permit structure.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, council members. I'd like to start out my part of the presentation telling you about two types of permits that we issue here in the harbor for commercial harbor activities. The first is commonly referred to as a CHAPS permit, and it's for those types of operations that have a fixed base, a place where they can embark passengers, and they have a fixed location for parking on a permanent basis. They have to follow Chapter 1741 of the Municipal Code, and we at Harbor Resources issue that permit. The second type of permit is the Marine Charter Permit, which is for one-time event only, and that's for those folks that don't have a fixed base of operations. There's a lot of vessels that come from other ports, especially during the Christmas parade, and do a one or two event permit for activities here in the harbor. They operate via Chapter 518 of the Municipal Code, and our Administrative Services Revenue Department issues those permits. A little bit more about a CHAPS permit. Again, the fixed base of operation, permanent berthing and loading. We have 14 businesses that currently have CHAPS permits here in the harbor, and out of those 14, only 4 of them provide charter services and have 14 vessels that are authorized to do so under those CHAPS permits. Again, the permit requires the applicant to identify and maintain permanent parking, which is really difficult for most of them to obtain, and that's why we only have 14 businesses that have that type of permit. That's their hardest requirement to meet. And it also provides for a maximum vessel capacity based on the number of passengers they may carry per event. It's a one-time fee of $481, and the permit is valid indefinitely unless terminated or revoked by the council.
Before you go on, what are the other, just quickly summarize what the other 10 types of businesses are?
I will show those to you in a minute.
Thank you.
I thought I'd show you, in fact, in this slide, some of the variability in the vessel size, the character, and usage. At the top left are the small Duffys. They have a charter permit. The Catalina Flyer, taking passengers over to Catalina, has permit. The Hornblower Fleet, which does dinner cruises, has a permit. And then so do the fun zone operators that carry folks around the harbor on a date tour type discussion. Here's the actual list. You'll notice here that the size varies quite a bit, but that all of the charter companies seem to have one large boat at least with a very large capacity. In Charter Memories fleet, Endless Dreams is a 117-foot boat with a 500 capacity. You go down to the Fun Zone Boat Company, and they have a 102-foot boat with 188 capacity. Hornblower has a couple of large boats. Entertainer is the largest with almost 600 passenger capacity. Next slide, Dave, please. And then Davies Locker and Newport Landing have a lot of vessels that are used primarily for fishing, except during the Christmas parade when they carry passengers. And then lastly, Charter Yachts of Newport with Icon is our newest CHAPS permit, just getting a permit this last January. And they have one vessel, 105 feet, with a 150 capacity. So there's quite a variability among the charter fleet and their vessel capacity.
Where is Charter Boats of Newport located, the last one? Charter Yachts, I mean.
It was located in Lido Marina Village. They bought a parcel on Mariners Mile, where the old South Shore Yacht Club was, and they're in the process of converting those slips into 3 large slips. And here is some of the others that are not charter vessels. Marina Sport boat rentals, small skiffs, same with Balboa Boat Rentals, again with Pavilion skiff rentals. Duffy, which you saw in the photos. We have a Newport Sailing Club and the Gondola Company, a jet ski permit, and also the bait barge, which is out in the entrance channel. So quite a variability of permit holders. I'm going to pass it on to Glenn, who's going to talk about the 518 permit holders.
Mayor and council members,
Wait. Before, Mr. Rossman, can you stand up again and tell us the other side of the coin, if you're not going to cover it? What does the municipal code apply to 4,000 or 5,000 capacity if you total all those up? What is it? What sort of teeth do we have over the CHAPS license holders? Are we going to come back to that?
We'll come back to that in a later slide.
That's fine. Thanks.
CHAPS permits and the ordinance establishing those permits was originally adopted in 1970, and the original concept behind the CHAPS permits actually exempted in 1970 fixed-based operations operating pursuant to a use permit and privately chartered vessels. So the original intent in CHAPS permitting never included charter operations. In fact, in the 70s, there were very few charter operations based in Newport Beach. Marine charter permits were established in 1985 specifically to regulate charter boats, and the issue that we had in 85 was that we had a large number of charter boats that were operating that weren't Coast Guard certified. At the time in 85, CHAPS regulations required that the vessel the vessel operated pursuant to CHAPS permit had to be Coast Guard certified vessel. Very few of them were Coast Guard certified because at the time there were provisions in federal law that actually allowed just about anybody that had a boat to operate in a charter capacity. Legislation stiffened that up in the 90s, and then today the only vessels that we find operating are Coast Guard certified vessels. Dominating the industry in the 80s when we adopted this ordinance were agents, people that didn't own anything. They owned an office space perhaps, but they weren't boat owners, they weren't owners of docks, they weren't parking facility operators. They were people that put these elements together in order to conduct a charter. So often these agents were basically salespeople that would put together buyers with product providers. Permits were originally administered, and still are today, by the Revenue Division, primarily because at the time the Marine Department that existed in 1985 was really ill-equipped to handle the public service requirements, the customer service requirements associated with processing a permit for each and every charter. At the time, the Revenue Division had special event permit processing. We had programs in place that made us well qualified to process those. Again, the permit's required for every single charter. So unlike the CHAPS permits, where a permit's good, allows the vessel and that business to operate until the business sells, we issue a permit every time the boat pulls away from the dock. And the requirements that we put in place, parking, boarding, trash, licensed skippers, etc., only have to be met for the duration of that charter. Today we have about 85 Coast Guard certified and city inspected vessels, and there are about 35 different companies that apply for the marine charter permits with the Revenue Division. They operate out of 12 different approved boarding locations and have about 16 previously reviewed and approved parking facilities that they point to. Application fees range from $23 to $82 depending on how many charter events there are in a month's period by that same company with the same dynamics and how much lead time they give us to investigate the permit. Last year, 2005, we processed 1,900 charter permits and put 135,000 or so passengers on those boats.
Glenn, can I ask you a question on that slide? Are the 12 approved boarding locations included in the 16 approved parking locations, or are those separate?
They are separate locations. I'm going to depict here on two photographs that we have specifically where the parking locations are. The yellow marks there indicate the parking, and you'll see with the approved boarding locations that they largely follow where vessels are authorized by Harbor Resources to embark passengers. Go back and forth, parking and boarding. So you see down by the fun zone area, we have approved boarding locations, and most of the operators there don't provide off-street parking facilities. They depend on primarily the Balboa lot to satisfy their parking requirement. Charter revenue for last year, we had one CHAPS permit for $481, $64,000 in charter permit applications for the revenue division process, and about $138,000 in charter passenger tax. It's a per capita charge imposed on the number of passengers that the CHAPS permittee or the Marine Charter permittee facilitate on their charter, where the charge for the passenger exceeds certain threshold amounts. Over $26 or over $50 are the two thresholds.
What are those charges?
50 cents or $1 per passenger. Over $26, over $50.
So we get if it costs $50, we get $1.
Correct.
Thank you.
Other Tidelands charges that the Revenue Division and Harbor Resources are involved with, offshore moorings, onshore moorings, residential piers and commercial piers, oceanfront encroachments, about $1.4 million out of the yacht basin with the various slips, apartments, garages, 2 or 3 commercial uses down there. Back to Tom, or back to Chris, I should say.
Thank you, Glenn. So now we would ask, what are some of the concerns? And the first concern would be about growth. And in 1908, there were only 6 rowboat rentals, and now we've got about 100 vessels in the harbor, putting about 500,000 passengers in the harbor. Growth leads to concerns such as parking. Are all the permittees parking their passengers according to their permits? Tidelands versus upland uses. The upland use could be a mixed business use, could be in shops and various stores, and then a charter company conducting business on the Tidelands. Or conversely, it could be the upland use could be the charter company who has an office there, and that's all that's there, with a charter boat on the Tidelands right in front. Safety. We need to ensure that passengers are safe with their boarding, etc., and enforcement. Currently, Harbor Resources and city staff handle enforcement on a complaint-type basis.
Excuse me. Under the safety, do we have specific regulations like the property that's right next to what I used to call the John Dominus? I don't know how many times I've come down onto Coast Highway and they've had buses offloading people blocking a lane of traffic. Is that are they restricted from doing that?
Well, that would
Or
be...
how do we enforce something like that and make sure that's not allowed?
It depends on the nature of the permittee. At John Dominus, we don't have any commercial harbor activity permittees, Mayor, so violation there would be probably a permitted operation under the marine charter permits. We specifically condition, 518 authorizes us to impose any conditions to ensure that we've got met safety concerns, public welfare, peace and quiet, et cetera. So we specifically prohibit charter vessels in every permit we condition from embarking, disembarking passengers on public streets. There are about 2 exceptions to that we do.
I'm not worried about them getting off the boat onto the public street. I'm worried about them getting off the bus that takes
No, that's
them
what
from
I'm
parking
speaking
there.
of.
Okay.
Their boarding of passengers from transportation services is prohibited on public streets. With the exception of about twice a year during the Christmas boat parade, we'll facilitate through the traffic engineering division of Public Works the disembarking of passengers from buses just at the entrance to the Avon parking lot, and they cross using the crosswalk at Tustin.
But, Glenn, Don makes an observation that they actually do it on Pacific Coast Highway, and in Lido Marina Village, they actually do it on Via Lido or Via Porto. So it happens all the time. All you got to do is go down on a Friday or a Saturday night. They're using the public streets to disembark from a bus.
And we're happy to respond on a complaint basis. I think when the mayor was an active city employee, we regularly acted on his observations about charter vessels operating down on Coast Highway and had a positive response to those enforcement efforts.
Okay. Yeah.
Some other issues that have come to light was the recent vessel accident with Endeavor, and I'll touch briefly upon this. Basically, on November 19th, the vessel lost power, and both its generators and engines completely lost power, and it basically drifted down Lido Nord eastward towards the turning basin, and it deflected off of a couple docks along Nord in the 800 block and hitting one Grand Banks of 43 Grand Banks, 51-foot Viking, and the Skylark, as you can see with the picture, did substantial damage. There was a Mayday call that the Harbor Department responded to, and they were able to tie a line onto the vessel as it was drifting and deflecting off of the homes and vessels, and they were able to secure the vessel. I talked to the charter operators, and their primary concern was that the passengers on board, there was a wedding on board, that they were all safe, and so their crew was primarily concerned with getting all the passengers braced for any other collisions. So she was happy that there were no injuries reported.
Can you expand upon that? Because it was reported to me from multiple sources that they did not have a deployable anchor, and that there was not a crew person that was qualified to deploy the anchor, and that's why the Harbor Patrol was called in to secure the vessel, which continued, as I understand, down the channel, and it eventually ran into some cans in front of the Newport Harbor Yacht Club. Well, I'm just saying, this sounds like something from the Wild West. I mean, do you have any reports about
In the
any of that?
In the police report, the accident report that I read, it didn't mention the anchor. We didn't hear anything about the anchor, and I heard the same story too. But in the Harbor Department's police report, I didn't see reference to that.
Was that a requirement? I mean, who regulates these boats? I mean, this is a perfect example. Is it the Harbor Patrol, the Coast Guard, the city? I mean,
the Coast Guard does inspections on vessels, and they certify vessels for passenger.
I understand, but
boarding.
if it was reported to me they didn't have a deployable anchor, and that vessel had been inspected, this is a big boat. It's hard to hide an anchor for that size, but no one seems to have an answer to this with this sort of damage of this many people on board. It kind of focuses on me, who's in charge here, that we don't have an answer to this. Mr. Rossmiller?
I think a partial answer to the anchor question is that they lost all electrical power and claimed that they couldn't deploy the anchor, and they were busy keeping passengers secure. You can see in the top photo that there was a number of windows broken out on the vessel, and so they were getting the passengers away from those windows and didn't have time to go deploy an anchor if there was one on deck. I don't know that there was, and I understand that besides the Harbor Patrol investigation, there's going to be a Coast Guard investigation that will look into that issue
Good,
further.
that's fine. Thanks. Go ahead.
Well, Tom, I think a lot of boats actually have the ability to override the electric and do it by a hand crank. So if they had any type of procedure here, they would have been able to deploy an anchor anyhow.
Yeah. The report says that they were busy
Taking care of the wedding, yeah, I understand.
Another issue that has been raised is, our commercial vessel is too big for the harbor. And Harbor Resources does not regulate vessel size for private or commercial vessels. Vessel length in the harbor is self-regulated due to the size of the available slips in Newport. And I've tried to outline some areas. Newport has a few 100-foot-plus slips that could conceivably berth 125 to 130-foot vessels. And they're mostly located in this area, along Coast Highway scattered, and right here on the tip of Lido Peninsula, primarily for the larger commercial slips.
Can I stop you right there? Mr. Ridgway, maybe you can refresh my memory. I thought when we were talking about slips before, one of the issues was that a boat could not protrude so much beyond the length of a slip, mainly because I've been out in my boat and had my head taken off a couple times almost by a bow puppet with an ugly anchor hanging from it. I thought do we have no regulations? I mean, you can end tie a boat and stick it out halfway in the channel?
Yeah,
but I don't know how that's enforced very well.
The council policy H1 says that any boat moored at a pier, dock, or float shall not extend bayward a distance of more than the width of the beam beyond the pier, dock, or float. So if you have a finger float and your boat is 10 feet wide, you can extend 10 feet past the end of the finger.
Now, who
Yes,
enforces
we do.
that? The Harbor Patrol?
Harbor Resources enforces that on a complaint-type basis. The policies do not address vessel height or width, which leads us into the charter vessel overhang issues. As I just said, the boats cannot extend beyond the width of the beam. And there are many cases of recreational and commercial violations of this policy, but as I said, we do respond on a complaint-type basis. We are attempting to abate this issue with the city attorney's office and revenues.
In that particular picture, what is the beam of that boat?
The beam of that boat is approximately 25 to 27 feet.
Okay, so
And the end of the finger is right here. If it was on the other side of the Spirit of Newport, it's about right there. So from about right here to here, the vessel was overhanging. Just visually, it was probably allowed to be to about right here, which means that it was overhanging past its allowable limit by about this distance right here.
now, do we have a fine, or can we hook a boat up and tow it away and sell it, or?
Well, we worked with this company for a very long time, and through some meetings with city staff and even a citation through an administrative citation, the vessel is no longer allowed to berth in Newport, and its home port is now in Long Beach. Now, during Christmas, we did allow it to berth during the December holiday season, but going forward, it's not allowed to berth in Newport overnight. And that's one of Glenn's conditions on the permits that he gives to this vessel.
Well, let me ask you, why was that exception made? I mean, this is clearly a revenue-generating operation, our policy specific.
The city attorney's office felt that we wanted to treat all the charter operators the same, and we didn't want to appear that we were singling out one vessel over another. There was the charter operator complained to us that he felt that we were, and we were advised to they were able to berth in that slip for December, and then that would be it.
But are we going to give them an exception next December? Okay, city attorney?
This particular situation, and I didn't, when he says the city attorney, it was actually the assistant city attorney that worked with them on this issue, and a lot of it related around the fact that they were cited for the extension, and it raises the fact that the city's policies do not address this type of situation that has started to come up in the last, I guess, 10 years or so, or however long, in that policies are enforceable against city employees for the permitting process. They're not enforceable against the general public. And so what we need to do, this particular situation as well, highlights the problems that we now are facing with getting the policies adopted as an ordinance of the city, so it's enforceable, it can be fined, they can be cited for it. At this point in time, all staff can do is require them to move the boats on a complaint basis and address the permittee holder, which is the holder of the docks, for allowing those boats to moor there in violation of the policies. So it's
so
just
you're gonna
one
be-
circumstance. So I guess the answer to your question is are we going to give them an exception next December? Not if we can get some ordinances in place that have more teeth in them.
Are you going to be bringing those ordinances back to us then?
It's our goal.
Okay. How much longer do you have?
Hopefully they would go, I know it's within the purview of
The Harbor Commission first.
yeah, Harbor Commission first, only, even though they have probably no authority, I think it's the appropriate place.
Oh, of course, but you're asking by next December. So the plan is for this year to start processing those really important areas that are in our policies that really, due to the pressures and the amount of charters coming through, and in conjunction with the other issues that we'll be bringing to the council with regards to taking the chaps, and I think they're going to talk about the proposed ordinance on dealing with these charter permits in the form of a new ordinance. So the next step would be to start looking at some of these other areas where we really need to get them in an ordinance form, because what was not a problem before is becoming more and more a problem.
Mayor Webb?
Councilmember Daigle?
Yes. In conjunction with item 21, which is our fee resolution, I was doing some research and get some background information on that and learned that in 1994 there was a study done by accounting firm KPMG, and they came up with what cost recovery is for a whole range of activities in the city. And then what happened following that study is the city council made some policy decisions, and they said, well, these activities, we don't want to get full cost recovery. We want to subsidize them. After all, our residents pay a substantial property tax and so on and so forth. Maybe we don't want to charge full cost recovery for this and that. Do you know offhand, in terms of these activities, are they being subsidized, or are we getting full cost recovery when you're looking at some of the enforcement issues that have been expressed to us today and so on?
Councilmember Daigle, I'd actually anticipated addressing those kinds of questions this evening on that item that we'll have before council this evening. But I did today rank by percentage of recovery those that are identified, those fees that are identified specifically in Chapter 3.36, where council establishes those percentages to be recovered. The fees that you'll find in the fee schedule that's coming before you tonight and that KPMG studied back in the mid-'90s included the permit processing efforts on the part of Harbor Resources. None of the enforcement activity associated with that, so you won't find any penalties or fines in the fee schedule. But for those fees that we do articulate in the schedule that relate to Harbor Resources, off the top of my head, my recollection of running that this morning, I believe Harbor Resources fees are all 100% recoverable through the actual cost.
So would it make sense that we might want to consider another accounting study that would capture the full range of these activities?
You're anticipating one of the slides that you'll see hopefully before we're done here this evening.
Okay, I'll try to hurry through these next few slides.
Yeah, I noticed we have a number of people in the audience, and I wanted to have them have a few minutes to comment.
In 2003, I did a noise survey, and just quickly recapping, there were some about 12 vessels that were above. This slide has been changed actually since this has been updated. Since about 12 vessels were over 65 dB, and about 54 vessels were below 65 dB. And the bottom line is that there were a handful of vessels that were considered loud, and loud means loud parties, people talking on deck, shouting, music, and things of that nature. And the quiet vessels were dinner parties. All the windows are closed and generally quiet. In Municipal Code 102625, 65 dB is the cutoff for commercial businesses as a frame of reference. Now, on the other hand, some Balboa Island residents, regardless of this study and the numbers here, feel that I must say that the charter vessels do represent a large, are very noisy, and they brought that up to our attention in the past. So from the Harbor Commission's perspective, they advised us to, they would like staff follow up to ensure the permittees are complying with the conditions. They'd like for us to revise the commercial dock construction standards, which we are currently doing, and will be before the City Council in a few short weeks, hopefully. They would like for us to consolidate the charter regulations into 1710, which Glenn will be talking about and bringing before the Council in 2 weeks. And the Harbor Commission has asked that maybe we look into long-term leases for the charter facilities, and that's also addressed in 1710. Possibly reviewing the parking requirements, and again, addressed in 1710. And perhaps consider a citywide limit on passenger capacity. Is there a maximum passenger count that's appropriate for the harbor? And now I'll turn it back over to Glenn.
1710 is something that the Harbor Commission asked staff to start working on 2.5 years ago. We had two ordinances, one circa 1970, one 1985, that collectively were to regulate any commercial conduct on the harbor. In reality, we've done a lot of regulation of charter vessel operations through 518, not so much regulation on those on all the other commercial kinds of operations that are occurring in the harbor. What we're proposing, and what we've taken through a number of processes that I'll relate, is consolidating, creating a new ordinance that would consolidate those two ordinances. 518 and 1741 rather would be repealed, creating this new 1710. There'll be an annual permit review, as opposed to under the Marine Charter Permit Ordinance, you get a permit that's good, it's an evergreen permit, or the 518 permits that are good for the 4 hours that you have a charter. We're proposing an annual permit process where we bring the CHAPS permits under review on an annual basis. The 1710 would propose to reduce the number of exemptions for maintenance, repair, and construction businesses that are currently exempted in wholesale in 1741. We are proposing to exempt any of those kinds of operations that have one or fewer vessels in their operation. If you're operating more than 2 vessels in a construction or maintenance capacity, you'd fall subject to the Marine Charter or the 1710 permit we're proposing. This 1710 proposes not to impose the standards that we have on existing commercial harbor activity permittees. We have a number of CHAPS permit holders that do not and cannot meet the parking requirements, for example. So we're going to deem that those existing CHAPS permit holders are in compliance with the requirements of 1710 until they have a significant change in their business operations. A significant change would be an increase in the passenger capacity, another vessel brought in, a change of dock location, change in the configuration of their docks. It would create exemptions for commercial businesses operating on the tidelands that are operating pursuant to a lease with the city or a franchise agreement. We have a number of those businesses currently operating here. And it has the effect of identifying on a more regular basis those businesses that are actually operating in the harbor. We have no idea who's operating in our harbor, unlike what we're able to do on the land with businesses. I have inspectors that are out confirming that those businesses that are operating on terra firma in Newport Beach are licensed, we have less opportunity with those businesses operating on the tidelands. 1710 generated a number of issues with the industry, and when we began 2.5 years ago taking this issue to the industry, the Harbor Commission established the Charter Boat Subcommittee. We've had half a dozen meetings with the Charter Subcommittee over the last 2.5 years, 6 meetings that Mark Sylvie has graciously afforded us with the Chamber of Commerce Marine Division to work with stakeholders and how this new ordinance would work. We've taken this issue back to the Harbor Commission 3 times. Issues that we've been dealing with there, concern over an expansion of the regulation, that existing permit holders won't qualify, that there will be exorbitant fees, protracted processes, et cetera. I think we've done a good job of resolving through this 2.5 years of outreach with the industry. And to date.
We're almost done, council members. The last issue is one that Councilmember Daigle just raised. We believe at a staff level that the fees we charge in the harbor are probably out of whack. That's the technical term. That we did a comprehensive appraisal in 2001, but it wasn't implemented. And that we believe, and as Glenn pointed out, some of the harbor facilities are on a year-to-year permit system, and they pay an annual fee. Others are on long-term leases. So, like, for instance, the Bay Club and its facilities are all on long-term leases, a long-term lease, where you can have a similar use that's on a year-to-year permit, and it doesn't always make the best sense. It's generally developed property by property over time and probably doesn't make sense today. And again, I think some activities, especially moorings, commercial permit fees, and residential pier fees, are likely not at fair market value. So why is this important? The Tidelands Trust, in one of your council policies, which is F7, says that we have to operate the trust properties in a manner that provides for the benefits outlined in the trust, which basically is the conduct of an efficient harbor. And that links to the policy, because the policy says that all of our properties should be analyzed routinely to determine what the fair market value is. Now, you can choose to select a lower rate, but you have to make findings associated with why you'd be doing that after you determine what the market rate is, and we would do that for you, of course. So we have a proposal that we're going to bring before you, and hopefully either the next meeting or the following meeting, where we do a 3-tiered look at this because it's so complex. We'd have an economist come in and look at the harbor, just like was done for the American Trader, where they actually assign a value for what is a day at the beach worth. In other words, what is our harbor worth to the community? Secondly, we'd also do a fair market value appraisal of the harbor. And it is tough to find qualified, non-conflicted appraisers, but we think we'll be able to do that. And then finally, a cost of services look. What does it cost to administer the harbor, including the TMDL program, water quality enforcement, the harbor resources itself, the regional general permit applications. Those are the dredging permits that individual property owners can get under our blanket permit, and the city general fund actually pays for the studies associated with that permit. Dredging, of course, if the city wanted to expand its contribution to dredging because we had to. We'd report this back to the Finance Committee and then to City Council. And then, again, that proposal to actually do this work should come before you in a couple of weeks. I'd note that on that bullet there about reporting to the Finance Committee and City Council, I didn't propose bringing this to the Harbor Commission. I certainly want the Harbor Commission's input, but just about everybody on the Commission does business in the harbor and would be affected by these fees. So we don't want to put them in a position of having a conflict. So finally, the next steps to bring that new chapter 1710 to you, initiate the 3-tier approach to evaluating the harbor fees. We also want to start to develop a template Tidelands lease and start moving commercial activities away from those annual permits to leases. And then, as Robin mentioned, incorporate the harbor permit policy, which is H1 in your book, into the Muni Code so we can better enforce it. And with that, Mayor and members of council, we're done with our presentation. We appreciate your time and questions.
Thank you. Council, I'd like to see if we have anybody in the audience that would like to ask questions, and because we have about 12 minutes before we have to go into closed session.
Mr. Mayor, one last thing. Mr. Kipp, when you have a 50-minute PowerPoint, it's real helpful if you can print those out. Giving me something tomorrow when I've got another phone book in front of me at my desk doesn't work. So if you have something like that, it's very helpful during a study session to give that to, at least to me. anybody else who wants it in hard
Yes,
copy,
sir.
so I can be making notes on it. Thanks.
Appreciate that.
Thank you. I'd like to now open this up to the public. If anybody would like to make a comment, you have 3 minutes per person. 3. Sorry.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having this opportunity to speak for a moment. First, I just want to...
Can you give us your name, please?
Oh, Stuart Sitko, 3602 Marcus. And I just wanted to quickly touch on, I noticed there was a little confusion on the Endeavor situation. I went out to the boat. I was at home making dinner, and I have a little, boat in front of my house there. I jumped on and went out there. I am one of the owners of the Endeavor. So I went out there, and they did have the boat anchored, and I restored power to the boat and got it in under its own power. Deputy Monroe said that he made a report out, and Philip interviewed all the crew, and he told me that everybody reacted in a very professional manner, and he had praise for the crew. As far as exactly what happened was that the vessel itself, there's a charging system on it that failed, and that brought the batteries down to the system batteries that actually control, all the major controls on the boat. The Coast Guard, I spent a week with the Coast Guard accident investigators. They had a whole team down on the boat, and we spent a week together going over every system on the boat in great detail. They had us put a couple redundant systems in. One is that if the charger ever shuts off, there's an alarm that goes off on the bridge now immediately. That gives us 4 hours of battery time to make a safe decision. Second of all, there is a redundant system on the steering, and why the captain didn't use that, I can only speculate. The Coast Guard found that everything in the steering was fine, and it could have been turned and the anchor dropped. There was no problem dropping the anchor. It's a manual system. It's just a matter of pulling a pin and it goes. Electrical power is not needed for it. But basically, it's very unfortunate, one that I feel horrible about. But after working on it with a solid week with the Coast Guard on the boat, they not only found that it's the same system they have on their cutters, but they were able to recommend some installation of some redundant systems so we have second and third redundant systems on to make sure everything's very safe. And they are going to probably put a notation in the CFRs to make sure other boats have these systems. I'm just thankful that no one was injured, and the crew took care of the passenger safety first. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Mr. Sitko, for the explanation.
Yeah, I have a question.
Mr. Councilmember.
And that is, as part of our regulations, do we require these operators to have insurance, like to take care of all the damage with those photos? Is that a requirement? I mean, you can tell me.
Yes, the U.S. Coast Guard does require insurance in order for us to operate, and of course, I require it too.
No, I understand. I just want to know.
Yes, the insurance companies came down, they were on the scene, and they have obviously taken care of
Good,
all the
fine.
problems needed, and that's
Good, thanks.
John, I know from reading the chaps in the Marine Charter Code that we have an insurance requirement in both of those.
Okay, thank you. Anybody else like to make a comment?
Mr. Mayor, City Councilman Ralph Rodheim, 311 Onyx Balboa Island. I'd like to thank Councilman Heffernan for bringing this subject up. As a harbor commissioner, we have looked at the charter boat industry. We think that it's a very good industry. We think that most of the boats are very responsible, do a good job, and provide economic benefits to the city, and also provide a service to those people for recreational boating. At the same time, we do have concerns about safety and the size of our harbor and the size of the vessels. As you saw, Destiny is a very large boat, and they do have windage problems, and when we have several of those very large vessels in the harbor, some of us feel that it does create a safety problems for the sailing, for the youth sailing programs and other programs throughout the summer. We have no way of limiting them at this point, so if you would really give consideration to the ordinances regarding the docks and the width of the beam. The challenge is, if we say the width of the beam, they can't extend past it, that would limit the size of the boats, but we also have violators that are private residents, and if we say that that's the rule for one, we have to, at what point, and then if it's only by complaint, if I complain against one boat, then he complains against others, there's probably 50 to 100 boats in the harbor that exceed past the width of the beam. So it's not a black and white issue, but it is one way to control the size of the vessels here. The charter boat industry prefers the larger boats. It's much more economical to take 500 or 300 people once on one boat than 3 100-passenger boats. So I understand the economics. But again, our harbor is not Long Beach, is not San Diego, and to keep the ambiance, the feeling, the character of the harbor, your support is appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else like to comment this time? Okay, I'll bring it back to the council. Are there items that you'd like to discuss? Councilmember Ridgway?
Thank you. You guys brought back old memories, I will tell you that. Having spent 4 years with you guys and then having the Harbor Commission, I just think I want to commend staff, Harbor Commission, and anybody in the marine industry for, one, the reputable and qualified organizations are truly appreciated, and two, this was an excellent report, and you're headed in the right direction. I think I espoused 7 years ago, Bob Burnham and I worked on trying to do leases instead of annual renewable permit fees for the commercial entities out there. I think that's a given, but there's really nothing to say except you're heading in the right direction. Ralph, you and I may disagree on trying to legislate boat size. This harbor has gone in and out of being big boats, small boats, and medium boats. I would rather let the marketplace dictate that, but there may be a point in time. We have a depth issue, as you know, design depth, so there is a limitation on the size of boats just by the design depth of the channel, and then once you get out of that channel, it's very difficult because of the low spots in the bay. Anyhow, I have nothing but good to say. I think I know the reputable organizations. Glenn, I'm really pleased to hear that for the CHAPS permittees and the other permittees that, okay, they're grandfathered now today with parking, but if they make a substantial change, we're going to really revisit that one. That was one, as you remember, some years ago, and us even on the Marine Committee. We looked at that, and I think you're handling it fairly. I think it's equitable, and I think the approach is fair and reasonable. It was good to see on a slide all the boats who come under the CHAPS. I couldn't have told you that the fishing fleet and the Catalina Flyer and some of the little Duffy boats are all under CHAPS. It was that was really good information. That was some information we used to speculate on years ago, but I think the Harbor Commission is doing a great job, and Harbor Department, you guys are to be commended. Obviously, you're way ahead of where I thought you were.
Was there anybody else just say, Councilmember Selich?
Yeah, I just had a question on the, you brought up that the commercial and the residential pier permit fees were under market. I think in the study or the fee adjustment schedule we're looking at later tonight, I think that's like 45 cents a square foot for the commercial and like $97 a year for residential permits. How far under market are they? I mean, what do they charge in
rather-
other cities, I guess, and other harbors is really, I guess,
That'll
what
be
I'm
part
after.
of the study. I'd rather not speculate, because they're different.
Hasn't anyone ever thought to, like, call somebody and see
No,
what
we
they're
have that
charging?
data. I just, it'll depend on
I'm
whether
just
or
curious
not-
as to what other people are charging.
Do you remember some of that, Tom, or?
We have a George Jones appraisal, Ed, and I have it, and I'll get it over to you.
It just seems like a simple question.
The George Jones appraisal is tied to the upland use, so it's difficult to say in a blanket statement what it is, but depending on whether the use on the water side is tied to the use on the land side, there are different
Well, I guess I'm just
values.
looking for something simple, like Coronado Cays in San Diego has a lot of residential. What do they charge? What do Ventura Keys charge? I mean, what does Naples charge? I mean, they all have similar situations.
The other issue is that for the commercial facilities, we charge 33 cents a square foot based on the water space that they occupy, where most other facilities and other harbors have leases, and we'd love to convert ours to leases so that it's a percentage of the gross that the fee is based on, not per square foot basis.
Well, that study we're looking at later seemed to indicate that we could only recover our cost and not make a profit on those fees. Is that the case in something like this, or did I misread that?
On the permit fees, we can only recover our costs for the administrative processing of the permits. But for the value of the tidelands, that's the other appraisal that we intend to do. We can get fair market value.
Okay.
Councilmember Heffernan?
Oh, yeah. As far as the fees for the permits and all, at some point, we're going to have to dredge that lower bay. And listen, I brought this issue up. I've had a boat in this harbor for 30 years, and I'm the guy who lives furthest from the water of anybody up here. The point is, things have changed. You have 500,000 visitors that are on boats. There's a capacity issue, and who is the city in business for? The residents that live around that complain constantly about the noise, the 10:30 music, the 11:30 music that's on. You know, how do we police our bay? We don't. The Harbor Patrol isn't answerable to us. It's a county facility. At a certain point, we're going to have to dredge the bay, and you're going to look. And if you don't make a change of raising money, you're going to look to the rest of the city to pay for that. We all enjoy it, but the people that really enjoy it are the people that are on the bay. And if you have bigger boats, there's even more of an issue of making the channels deep the way they should. They're, as I understand, way out of date. This isn't poking a finger at the charter boats. It's looking at our whole system, how we administer the tidelands, and how we should administer the tidelands on a long-term basis. You know, and this is just one aspect of it. But again, if you have 500,000 people on charter boats in the harbor, which these figures indicate, then that is creating a potential or actual nuisance to people that surround the bay that live in homes that can be affected by them. And we have a good start here, and I thank staff for putting a lot of effort here. Mr. Rossmuller and Mr. Kiff in particular, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Ridgway?
Yeah, I want to try to answer a couple of questions or comments down there to Ed Selich. There is no simple answer, and especially if you read the George Jones appraisal, number one. Number two, Mr. Heffernan has espoused for years, let's raise the residential fees, and I have no problem in doing that. Even if you doubled it, it wouldn't be that much money. The residential homes on the water are obviously paying substantially more in property tax, and so you have to. There are so many variables in this formula that there is no simple answer. And they own the land, and then you have the littoral rights to the dock space. So it's very, very, very complex. That's all I can say to you. There's no simple answer. Perhaps, we look at, and I mean, if we're going to talk about raising fees for dredging, maybe the passenger tax, the charter taxes. I mean, this has to be looked at comprehensively. What I was amazed at was that, Glenn, your number only shows under CHAPS, a marine charter permit license, about $200,000. I intuitively, I know our services to those, our cost of services to those organizations is higher than that. I just intuitively know that. I live on the Bay. I visit Lido Marina Village. I mean, we have more police calls there and other types of calls. So anyhow, I'm glad you're on it. Quite candidly, I think it's a great industry. It's the heart of our city. It's the heart and soul of our city. That is the harbor. But we need to perhaps run it more like a business and less. It's just been mismanaged. I won't say mismanaged. It's just not been tended to in a long time, and that's what this is all about.
Thank you, Mr. Ridgway. Thank you, staff, for your presentation. I'd like to now adjourn the study session. Public comments on non-agenda items. Excuse me. Do we have any public comments on non-agenda items? Seeing none, we'll adjourn the study session to closed session. Robin, do I need to announce the closed session items? Do I need to?
No.
No.
Okay.